Hi, it's Gary. Welcome to today's video. Can you believe it? End of February. I know February's meant to be the shortest month, but gosh, this one has absolutely flown by. It seems like it only started last week. In this video, we're going to see how I got on with the 6 pens that I started off this month, and we'll have a quick look at the other pens that I added into my everyday carry use. So join me now, down on the mat. Let's jump straight in. So here we are down on the mat, time to jump in and let's rank this month's pens. So position number 6, well, I decided that would go to the Baoer 51. There's nothing wrong with the pen, there's nothing wrong with any of the pens, I just had to rank them. You know, for what this cost at $5, it's a really reasonably priced pen. It looks quite nice. It's got a bit of weight to it, so you can definitely tell it's in your hand, and I do like that. Unposted, it does feel a little bit on the short side for me. It does post, but I do think when I do that, it makes the whole pen feel heavy and really just not comfortable in my hand. It's got an unusual look to it. I like the stripe here, so we've got there alternating black and silver. It's not too bad, it's a nice pen, it writes quite nicely. When I'm holding it and writing, because I hold the pen fairly low down, I do find that the section here, it does feel a little bit on the narrow side for me. But that's a personal taste, and it doesn't stop me from writing, it just means after I've been using it for a few minutes, it makes my thumb pads ache a little bit. I have had some issues with skipping, especially with the second ink, the Diamine ochre. That's where I've really noticed it. More so when I'm using things like Rhodia paper or my cheaper paper. On the Tomoe River paper, it seemed to be fine. Let's go and take a look at the Tomoe River paper. So in this first one, we can see here, this is when it had Diamine Merlot in. That's what I started the month off with. If we jump down to near the bottom, we've got a hash mark, then a hash mark that I smudge. I've got a little scribble, then again a scribble that I can smudge. So it's a fairly wet combo. The line below that, this is where I'm looking at line variation. The first 3, that's with very little pressure. The next 3, that's with pressure added. And then I do some of those figure of 8s, them S's, just to see how it flows. And then at the bottom, where I've got that continuous scribble, that's just me continuously moving the pen just to see that the ink flow keeps up. Really nice. One of the things I will say with this, it's quite flat. There's very little shading. There's very little of real interest coming through in that ink. Let's look at the Diamine ochre though. So on here, loads of shading. Really like the interest when I'm using this. Again, let's look down at the bottom. So we've got our smudges. So we can see not as wet. You can see with the line variation, there's a little bit there, but it's a fairly stiff nib. But the scribbles at the bottom, they do keep up really nicely. If you check out some of my YouTube shorts, I'll put a link to some in the description. I'll just search on my YouTube channel. You'll be able to see some more writing samples on there. That's usually on Rhodia paper. And that's where you can start seeing the skipping and these issues coming through. So please check them out if you haven't already. So all in all, it's a nice pen. I really enjoy using it, but the whole point of this video is to rank them. So this month, this comes in at position number 6. Position number 5, this goes to the Wingsun 698. Here we go, this is in the transparent colour. This had a steel nib in it. By the look of this, it was a fairly dry combo. Now, I don't know if you've watched the video where I recorded this. When I wrote it, I will be honest, it was a very hot day and all my inks were drying a lot quicker than normally. But I just want to show you what we've got on here. I love the size of this pen. This pen fits so nicely in my hand. The section isn't too thin, the section's quite nice. It fits nicely in my hand, it's comfortable to use. One thing I will say is, although it will post, it's not very secure. You can see there, it's coming straight off. So posting, not really an option. It's an enjoyable pen to use. I really do enjoy writing with it. I love the ink colour, but as you must probably know, I love green. It's still nice, it's still enjoyable. Let's look at the Tomoe River paper. So here we can see it's just, again, a fairly flat looking ink. Not a lot of colour variation, not a lot of line variation. The nib is definitely stiff to use. I'm not going to say it's like a pencil, but it's getting towards that. To me, it reminds me of using a platinum pen. That's the sort of feedback, that's the sort of feel that I'm getting from it when I'm writing. At the very bottom this time, we've got our wetness. So you can see there, it's moderately wet. Line variation, You know, there's not a lot. Little bit, but I've got to apply a fair bit of pressure just to get that little bit of line variation. Then my scribbles, you know, so ink flow keeps up quite nicely. Again, there's some YouTube shorts about this. There is for all of the pens. So in terms of ranking, the Wing Sun 698 comes in this month at position number 5. At position number 4, that goes to the Kaco Edge. At the start of the month, this had Diamine Earl Grey. Partway through the month, I switched it to Noodler's Heart of Darkness. I love the look of this pen. It looks so nice. This is Macrolon material. It feels very light. If I take the cap off, the section, you must be able to tell, does feel a little bit on the narrow side. Very small nib, but it writes really well. I love writing with this pen. It's really nice. Whilst it's in my hand, I should have shown you this before I popped it down. Unposted, it's actually not too bad. It's quite nice to use unposted. I can post it as well. Just make sure I get the clip part sticking up rather than down into my hand. Again, feels a little bit back heavy, but that's because I normally use my pens unposted. So I find every time I post a pen, it always feels a bit back heavy. I love the colour. Because of the colouring of this, yes, I know I could get away with any ink, but to me, this was shouting at me, you need a grey or you need a black ink. I love the Diamine Earl Grey. It's really nice. It's a dark grey. It's not one which shouts to you, I'm different. It's just there. It's nice. Why I swapped to Heart of Darkness, my Twisby Eco that I normally have my black ink, well, that ran out. And I like to have a pen loaded with black ink because it's useful for filling out forms and stuff like that. So that's why I thought, let's make this my black driver pen. And so I put the Heart of Darkness in it. Really glad I did. Let's go and take a look over at the Tomoe River paper. So here we are with the Earl Grey. As you can see, it's a lovely grey colour. You would get away using this as if it was a black ink. It's not shouting out, I'm grey. It's just there and it's subtle. If you look down near the bottom, again, looking at the smudge test, it's a wettish combination. Line variation, definitely seeing some. You can see a marked difference between the two lots of lines. And then on my figure of 8s, again, when I'm doing that downstroke, you can see the thicker line there. Flow, again, keeps up really nice. Let's take a look with the Heart of Darkness. So again, it's nice. It's comfortable to use. I like that it's got that medium nib. Most of the other Chinese pens I've got, they're only fine nibs. So having something different, that really is nice. Again, looking at the bottom, we can see, as we saw on the other page, it's wettish, nice line variation, and keeps up with the flow. So all in all, I think this is a really enjoyable pen, and I'm looking forward to using it over the next few months as my black daily driver. But in terms of ranking, this had to come in at number 4. So that's the Kaco Edge. Just reposition the paper. We were lucky that all the first 3 pens that we looked at were all on the top, and the remaining 3 pens, they're all on the bottom. So which pen's going to come in at position number 3? Well, today it's the Moonman M800. And this did surprise me because I love the Moonman M800s. I really do. They're one of my favourite pens. But when I was looking at it against the other pens, it just really didn't shout position 1, didn't really shout position 2. Which is why we've had to go for position number 3. Start of the month, I was using this amber pen with J. Herbin Terre de Fouet. Partway through the month, I switched to using the green version of the pen. And in there, I have a broad Yoho nib and Diamine Black Ivy. You can see the difference in the line. The Bock Fine versus that Yoho broad. It surprises me, to be honest, how much of a difference I can see. Yes, I know I expected the broad to be wider, but when you compare them against each other, the difference is really visible. I love the way this pen feels in my hand. It's such a nice pen to write with. It's got a nice wide section. Body-wise, just about the right size. I do prefer a slightly longer pen. I have got the Leonardo Momento Zero Grande, which is slightly longer than this, but same body shape, and that's a lot more comfortable to use. But this is still quite nice. I love the colouring. You know, look at this. It's so nice. I've got 4 of these pens. I've got 1 in each of the colours, so I've got the amber, the blue, the green, and the purple. Such a joy to write with these. I've always got 1, if not 2 of them inked up. And because it hit number 6 size nibs, I can swap nibs around. So as I said, in the green one, I took out the Moonman nib, which was a fine nib, replaced it with a Yoho broad. Absolutely love it. Take a look over on the Tomoe River paper. So here we are with the Terre de Fleur. I know I'm going to mangle that word. I keep mangling it. I do apologise. This is a nice ink. It's an unusual brown colour. I want to say it moves towards the orange side of brown. It's certainly very unusual. Here I'm not seeing a lot in the way of shading, so it's a fairly flat ink. You know, I'm using a fine nib. Wetness, similar to the others, so normally about 30 seconds and the page is dry. Line variation, I do actually see quite a lot of line variation with this nib. So we've got the no pressure, then we've got with pressure, and certainly you can see that there's a marked difference, as we can also see on the figure of 8. Flow-wise, keeps up really well. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you a page with the Diamine Black Ivy. As I said, I swapped to this in the middle of the month. I'd been using it for a while for other things, but the ink ran out after a week before I was able to formulate my views on it and write it down on Tomoe River, and I didn't really want to ink it up with the same ink. I mean, it's a nice ink, it's a nice dark green colour. Depending on the paper, depending on the light, there's quite a lot of black in there as well, so I can see where it gets the name Black Ivy. But for all this, I still love the pen, and it's still one that I reach for. But we had to rank it, so for this month, this comes in at position number 3. That's the Moonman M800. Position number 2. Well, we've got a choice of 2 pens. We've got a Dian 960 or we've got a Wingsun 698 with a gold nib. This month I went for the Wingsun 698 at position number 2. Same as the steel version, same as the one which had that green ink. It's a lovely pen. In terms of shape and body, exactly the same. A nice fit, feels nice in the hand. This, it's a solid, I'm going to call it a grey colour. That's one of the things to me which lets this down. The grey, not very inspiring. I do like we've got this ink window. Because this is a piston filler, it's hard to know how much ink you've got left. So the use of this ink window means I can see roughly if I've got enough for the writing session I'm going to be doing. The thing I'm going to point out here, the nib on here isn't the gold nib. Once this pen had run dry, I actually swapped the nib on here with the nib on the transparent black version, because I like the transparent body, but I'm not too keen on this grey. So I thought to myself, come on Gary, let's put the nicer nib in there. So it literally is friction fit, pulled it out, swapped them over, and then the other pen right straight away. This shows though the difference that a nib can make from having the 698 with the steel nib versus the 698 with the gold nib. It's an entirely different writing experience. They're both pencil-like, so this still feels like using a platinum pen, but unlike the platinum pens, this has got a bit more of a spring to it. It's a bit softer. The steel version of this nib, that was fairly stiff. This one, a lot softer. A lot nicer to write with. Let's take a look over on the Tomoe River paper. So this is Diamine Writer's Blood. I love the colour of this ink. It's really nice. Again, not seeing much in the way of shading. It's a fairly, I want to call it a dark crimson type colour. But what's important is down near the bottom, look at the line variation. We've got a massive amount of spring, a massive amount of line variation in here. And it does come through in the writing. Our wetness, I do find this is a fairly wet combo, but I think the ink, Diamine Writer's Blood, I think that's quite a wet ink anyway. And the flow, again, no issues with it. Had no issues with any hard starts, any skipping. This is just a pen that is lovely to write and lovely to use. But the body is what let it down, that grey body. And I'm thinking now that it's in that transparent black, I think I'm going to enjoy using it more. And I've already inked up that transparent black body with Diamine All the Best. I know I'm taking a risk by putting a shimmer ink in there, but I thought, let's try it. Let's throw the worst at it. But for this month, the Wingsun 698 with the gold nib comes in at position number 2. So there goes the Wingsun. So by a process of elimination, chances are you'll be able to tell that the winning pen for this month is the Dian 960. I just think this is such an understated pen. It's so nice. I like the black. You know, you can use that with anything. And I know there are different versions of this pen. Let's take off the cap. It's got the widest section of any that we've looked at today. Really nice. Really comfortable. There's no lip at the bottom, so it's not digging in when I'm using this for a longer writing session. Lengthwise, maybe if I was going to whinge about anything, it's ever so slightly shorter than I'd like. But that's not a problem because I enjoy using it. It posts, but not very well. Again, I don't normally use my pens posted, so it doesn't really matter too much. Number 6 nib there, and it's a two-tone nib. I really enjoy that as well. I like the two-tone nibs because I don't know, it seems to me as if it just brings a little bit more interest rather than a single flat colour. Really good ink flow with this. Never had any issues with hard starts. Now before this month, I'd left it for about 3 weeks without using, picked it up, wrote straight away. So it's not one that dries up really quickly. It's just a lovely pen. If I had to whinge, well, because it's got that fine nib, that's what lets it down. And this is another one where I may put a broad nib in at some time in the future, but I'm not planning to do that just now. The Pure Pens Celtic C, the ink, love this ink in this pen. Let's go and quickly look over on the Tomoe River paper and you can see what I mean about the ink. I see lots of lovely shading when I'm using this ink in this pen. It's so nice. I like to see that shading because to me that's what adds character, that's what adds the interest to the ink. We've got a little bit of line variation as we can see down near the bottom. It's another one, fairly wet combo, and then the flow keeps up so well. I can't say how much I think this pen is understated. It's $35, so it's not cheap for a Chinese pen, but it's certainly not among the most expensive. And it's a pen that I've only got this one of it at the moment, and I think I need to invest and get some more Dian 960s. More so because then I could swap a number of nibs around and have a whole range of different nib sizes. In terms of scoring, this month, this is position number 1. Just going to turn the page over. So what we've got here, these are the pens that I brought into my rotation. So as some of the other pens ran out, I didn't bother to refill them. And what I did is I brought in some of the pens brought some other pens in to replace them. Now, I'm not going to rank these. The first one I brought in was the Jinhao 992. This is in the transparent brown colour. $2 this pen costs. And I can't stress enough, this is such an undervalued pen. It writes absolutely lovely. It really does. It's a very short pen, so not quite pocket pen size, but getting towards it. Section is a bit narrow, but when you consider it's $2, you know, what do you expect? This nib on here, wow, it just writes and writes and writes. One of the beauties with this pen, it comes with a converter, but everything's plastic and it's even got an O-ring. So if you wanted to, I think you could eyedropper it. Me, it's not something I plan to do. I like to use the converter. And I've got to be honest, a fill of ink in here seems to last about 2 months. Let's have a quick look at the Tomoe River paper. So again, we can see it looks fairly flat. You know, I've called out here, it's cheap. You can't beat it. Down near the bottom, again, fairly wet. Little tiny bit of line variation. Didn't expect to see a lot though, but the flow keeps up really nicely. So this is the Jinhao 992. Next pen I brought in was the Delike New Moon 2. Here we go. This is in dark rose. I love the colour of this. I think it's unusual. There's a number of pens and I have seen somebody comment saying that they thought this reminds them of some vintage type pens. So that's nice to see. Again, this is a fairly short pen and it's one I find I need to use it posted. It doesn't feel back heavy or clumsy when it's posted. I can get away with it unposted, but I prefer not to. As we can see with the section, it's fairly narrow, but still a nice writing experience. Let's take a look on the Tomoe River paper. Here we go, calling out again. I love this. I like the Diamine Syrah ink that I have in here. Wetness, again, very similar to all the others. Most of these, they're very similar in their drying times. I had no issues with it. No issues when I'm writing with it. We get some line variation in there. And then the flow just keeps up really nicely. So that's the Delike New Moon 2. The final pen we're going to look at, and this again is a fairly new pen to me. It's the Moonman C3. So I've only had this about maybe 6 weeks, so I thought, well, let's get in there and get using this. I love this. I love the colour. I love the whole body on this. I think it looks so nice. Again, bit on the short side. Does not post. Don't even attempt to post it. It just doesn't. That's the thing which lets it down because, as I say, it does feel a little bit on the short side. The section, again, it's fairly narrow, but we've got that number 5 nib, and this is where I may at some time look at getting some number 5 replacement nibs because this comes with a fine, you know, it's a fine line. I would prefer a broader nib, but that's just a personal choice. One thing I do miss with this pen is I miss that it's not got a clip. It's got this little, well, they call it a roll stop, and if it's going like that, it's fine, but it does not stop things. Whereas if I did the same with a pen with a clip, it would have stopped. If it's just rolling from there, It's not too bad. But that's the one thing I do miss with this pen. Let's take a look at the Tomoe River paper. Again, calling out much the same thing. In here I'm saying that the nib, it is a bit stiff, so it does feel a little bit like a pencil. We've got a reasonable drying time. Again, the temperature here is fairly hot at the moment, so we need to bear that in mind. Not much in the way of line variation, but the ink flow keeps up really nicely. So that was the Moonman C3. Let's just swap over. So let's fetch the pens back in for one final look. So we had at position number 6, the Baoer 51. Position number 5, the Wingsung 698 with the steel nib. Number 4, the Kaco Edge. Number 3, the Moonman M800. Number 2, Wingsung 698 with a gold nib. Number 1, the Dian 960. Honourable mentions, Jinhao 992, Delike New Moon 2, and the Moonman C3. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. What are your thoughts on these pens? Have you got any similar thoughts or any contradictory thoughts? I'd love to know. Please drop them down in the comments. I like the idea of kickstarting and having conversations about our pens and the way we use them. Please hit the thumbs up button. Every time you like, every time you comment, just helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so that you can get new videos as I release them. I'll talk to you again soon.